We're lucky today to have with us two speakers today who know about the potential for harm and good that microbes present. David Schneider is assistant professor of microbiology and immunology here at Stanford. He received his PhD from UC Berkeley in 1992. And David's specialty is bacterial infection, particularly as borne by insects. And David told me something about his own background in science. He said that I was a science fair kid. I finished top in the Canada-wide science fair, and it's spooky how similar that project was to some things I still do today. So stick with it if you're in the science fair. He also confided something to me regarding his partner in speaking today, Bob Siegel. He said that Bob Siegel is very colorful, that Bob is more colorful than David, and that in fact Bob is so colorful that he served as a Stanford mascot when he was a student here. In fact, our next speaker, Bob Siegel, our first speaker today, was the Stanford tree. Is this true? Excellent. Robert Siegel is associate professor in Stanford's Microbiology and Immunology department. Professor Siegel received his PhD from the University of Colorado in 1984 and his MD from Stanford in 1990. Bob's specialty is medical education and curriculum development. He has won too many teaching awards to name, but we come to understand, and we will come to understand why very soon. Please welcome our first speaker, Bob Siegel.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to share in this dialogue. In particular, I jump at the opportunity to talk about viruses, which I think of as the smallest predators. There we go. Okay. So least but not last, let me thank the microbes. And I'd also like to give my enthusiastic thanks to the organizers of Wonderfest, especially Tucker Hyatt, and to my fellow speaker, David Schneider, my partner in crime here. So I want to see how the audience breaks down. How many of you think the humans will prevail? See, I don't usually use a microphone. That's the problem. Okay, humans. What? Oh, he says no. Well, how many people think the microbes will prevail? Okay, and how many think it's going to be a dead heat? Okay. 3 of you, 4 of you, okay. So what we'll see what happens in terms of the dialogue. What makes this an interesting question for me is the number of ways in which this question can be approached. And I'm going to begin by kind of unfairly redefining the question as humans versus pathogens rather than human versus microbes. And I'm going to let David take the approach and answer the actual question of humans versus microbes. Now, pathogens come in a number of different flavors. First I want to we'll look at humans versus microbes. Okay, see if they combine. My first reaction is, of course, that the microbes are going to take the event because microbes evolve very fast and they have a lot of things that going in their favor, which we'll be talking about. But then you sort of look around and you see some of the successes that have been made by modern medicine, and you think, well, maybe the humans will prevail, and then we'll see that actually it might be sort of a more interesting question in the end. Okay, so I want to begin by talking about what pathogens are. They come in a number of different flavors, and in general, pathogens are things that have the ability to reproduce and they cause disease from within us. Now, because they cause disease from within, most of them tend to be very small. So it says whatever it is, it's very, very little. But it turns out not all pathogens are microbes. Some of them can be quite long. This is a tapeworm. These tapeworms can be over 20 feet long, still be inside the body, so they're still fit the definition of causing disease from within. But most of them are actually quite little things, and so we refer to those as microbes or microorganisms. Now, we see that there's not all pathogens are microbes, and as we said, not all microbes are pathogens. And actually, if we were really going to draw this with some accuracy, we'd have to put microbes as a big sphere, and pathogens would be actually too small to see up there, because it's a very small percentage of the total. Now, if we look at the different types of pathogens that infect humans, there's a number of different classes of pathogens, and they include bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoans, metazoans, and prions. Okay, so this says, okay, Bob, that's me. I'll try annoying parasites for 50, please, and this is what you see at animal game shows. So if we look at these different pathogenic groups, we find these guys here. And it turns out my favorite are, of course, viruses, and so I'll use those as many of the examples. If we look through this group, and I don't know if I can quite point these out to you guys, but if we have the bacteria, the fungi, the protozoan, and the metazoan, we're talking about organisms that are actually alive and can attack us. For the viruses, you're talking about something that's actually smaller than a cell and can only be thought of as kind of in a quasi-living fashion. So here's some viruses. First one was herpes. This is Ebola. And so they're kind of quasi-living pathogens that are at the border between the inanimate and the living. And that's one of the reasons I like them. And the famous virologist Horton, who some of you may be familiar with, states that viruses are some sort of a creature of very small size, too small to be seen by an elephant's eyes. Anybody familiar with the famous virologist Horton? He was an elephant. And Nobel Prize winner Sir Peter Medawar states that a virus is a piece of bad news wrapped in protein. And this turns out to be a remarkably good definition of what a virus is. So you just heard from David Deemer about the genetic material and how it encodes information. And for the simplest viruses, there's just that genetic information and this protective protein coat. Now, the metazoans and the protozoans basically are what we really refer to as the medical parasites. But all of these things are parasites in the sense that they take from their hosts and they don't give back. They don't benefit the host. We distinguish the protozoans and the metazoans from the fact that the protozoans have a single cell and the metazoans are multicellular. So it might be things like protozoans would be things like malaria parasite, which is Plasmodium, and the metazoans would be things like worms. Okay, and then I added to this list down here the prions, and the prions are a class of reproducing agents that's so bizarre that we really don't have time to talk about them, but it includes things like mad cow disease and a disease that's transmitted by cannibalism called Kuru. So here's an idea of some of the different morphology, shapes, appearances of these things, and up there you have fungi. At the top you have the second from the middle is flu. You have some bacteria like over in the corner there. This one over here is a fungus. You have some worms. So this has pretty much everything up there except for the prions. I actually brought a bunch of my friends with me. So here we have Ebola. And these are giant microbes, 1 million times normal size. This is kind of a cute one. It's with the flesh-eating bacteria. See, it's got the little knife and the fork. Anyway, kissing disease. Okay. Those are fun.
In case the Skype gets tiring, you just want to use this as a staring at that.
Okay, so what distinguishes infectious disease? An infectious disease is actually the kinds of diseases that are caused by these pathogens. And there's certain things that differentiate diseases that are caused by pathogens from all the other kinds of disease, the heart disease and cancer that we look at. So what are some of these key features? One is that we have interacting organisms, and that makes things very complex. So we're not just dealing with a single host, we're dealing with all kinds of different interactions, and it's more like a chess match than other types of disease. So we can actually think of this thing called the epidemiological triangle, in which you can think of interaction between the host, that's us, the pathogen, and what environment those things are existing in. Secondly, they have this reproductive or replicative capacity. And it's actually quite amazing to think about the replicative capacity of some of these microorganisms. And I'll use the analogy of a chessboard. I brought a chessboard home. Well, I had one at home. And I said to my son, I put a penny on the first space, 2 pennies on the next space, 4 pennies on the next space. I said, would you rather have the amount of pennies on the last square, or would you rather have $100? Well, my kids know I'm sneaky, and so they say, we'll take the 100. And I said, what about the amount of pennies on the last square or $1,000? And I said, I'll take the 1,000. Okay, I wasn't really going to give them money, but okay. So imagine these are bacteria, and say it's the common bacteria of the gut, Escherichia coli. It can divide every 20 minutes. Okay. Now, if you think about it, you can ask, how many 20 minutes are there in a day? Well, there's 24 times 3, 20 minutes, so it's 72 20 minutes in a day. I don't know if you've ever thought about 20 minutes before, but so anyway, these things start multiplying, and pretty soon they divide 72 times, and you end up with 2 to the 71st, because you started with 1 of these bacteria. So I'm sorry, yeah, it should be 71. Okay, because there's so you can end up with 2 to the 71st bacteria. Now, is that a lot of bacteria or not? Well, just for comparison, there are about 10 to the 50th atoms in the world. But in one day, you could produce more bacteria than there are atoms in the world. So it's a lot of bacteria. So why don't they do it? Well, there's not enough food. But what it says is that if something is a pathogen and starts to divide at the expense of your body, it can quickly multiply and cause disease. And that's why some diseases are actually rapidly life-threatening, and you have to act on them immediately. Now, we do have our host defenses also to keep them in check. Thirdly, in terms of infectious disease, unlike other kinds of human diseases, is the risk of contagion. And that is, you can spread it from one person to another, and that's a really scary thing. Now, not all infectious diseases are contagious, and I'll just make a quick distinction between infectious and contagious. So the best way to do this is by thinking of an example of something that's infectious but not contagious, and contagious but not infectious. And if you think about something that is infectious but not contagious, it might be something like a worm. If I swallow a worm and it starts multiplying inside of me, I don't necessarily spread that to anybody else just by being around. So it's okay to sit next to me and do stuff, and you won't get it. So I'm infectious. I have an infectious disease, but I'm not contagious. On the other hand, what about something that's contagious but not infectious? Something like smiling or laughing or yawning. Those are contagious, but they're not infectious. Okay. So also, you have a mobile target, and that is these things are alive, or at least quasi-living, and so they can actually change who they are. They can mutate, they can change, and they can they look a little different when you try to attack them. And a few other distinguishing features I'd like to mention is that, unlike other diseases, there are now incredible tests. This is kind of on the side of the humans, for diagnosing these conditions in a very specific manner. It's important to ask people where they've been exposed to and what they've been doing. There are curative treatments for some of these, such as antibiotics. We may be losing some of those curative treatments because of the fact that these are mobile targets and can be modified in the face of change. We can even prevent some of these very effectively with the use of vaccination and other preventative measures. And in the ultimate case, we could actually eliminate one or more of these from the face of the earth, and so we'd never have to deal with them in the future. And then a few of them are interesting because they're associated with cancers and other chronic diseases, and so there you see kind of a mixing of infectious disease with other types of disease. Okay, how are we doing? Okay, should we quit or?
Well, just, do you want to defend the microbes?
Oh, I'll go. Okay, I'll go for a few more minutes. So the next thing I want to talk about when we talk about who's going to win is we have to define the criteria for. Let's see. We have to define the criteria for what it would mean to actually win. Okay, so what is winning? Okay, so first I want to talk about what kind of defenses humans have on their side. Now, on their side, what humans have is physical barriers like skin is a very important one. We have physiological barriers like stomach acid that will prevent microbes from getting into your gastrointestinal tract. We have mucous membranes and different compounds on the mucous membranes that can stop us from getting infected. We have this thing called the innate immune system that is mobilized all the time to try to deal with pathogens, and Dr. Schneider is actually an expert on the innate immune system. We have human behaviors that can actually prevent us from getting disease by washing our hands or covering our mouths when we sneeze, and we also have science and medicine, and they can prevent disease through vaccines, through medicines, and also through education, which can feed back into behavior. Now, what do the microbes have on their side? They have rapid replication, as we talked about. They have high mutation rates, so they can change and be a mobile target. They have large numbers of offspring, as we saw. They have the ability to exchange and share genetic information, and you've probably heard about multi-drug resistance among bacteria, and that's because bacteria can actually trade the ability to resist antibiotics, and that all those things above lead to very rapid evolution of these pathogens. They have a very simple lifestyle, which can be advantageous in many cases, and they have the extraordinary ability to specialize. And so a lot of these things are targeted at a particular cell in a particular type of organism, and they're really good at what they do. And they also have a whole series of mechanisms for trying to deal with the human immune system, so they fight back as the immune system is trying to eliminate them. Okay, so those were the powers. Now I want to talk about what the criteria for winning. For humans, the criteria for winning would be we want to control people's disease so they don't get sick and die. We want to prevent disease and eliminate the possibility that the organisms can actually get into us. We want to control the spread from one person to another. We want to eradicate the pathogen and eliminate from the world. And we want to eliminate the niches where new pathogens might be and be re-entered into the human population. As far as the microbes, what they want to do as far as their criteria for winning, they want to continue to exist. That's what they want to do. They want to efficiently replicate. They want to spread from host to host. And unlike organisms, our biological imperative is to reproduce. But microbes have not only the biological imperative to reproduce, but also to get from, not microbes, but pathogens, to get from host to host. They want to spread also not just from host to host, but from one group of people to another, population to population. And they want to be able to exist and persist over time. So those are the things that the microbes want. So we can ask a number of questions. Do pathogens win if they eliminate humans? Well, the answer is clearly no, because they need the humans in order to replicate. Do pathogens win if they kill their hosts? And the answer again is no. Okay. Therefore, pathogens can never win in the sense of vanquishing humans from the earth. That's not their goal. Now we can ask a further question: do they want to cause disease in humans? And the answer to that question could be, the possible answers are yes, no, and they don't care. And it turns out all three of those answers are true. The answer would be yes if making you sick facilitates the spread of the pathogen. And now examples of that might be diarrhea or sneezing, where you can spread the pathogen from one host to another. The answer would be no if the fact that you're so sick you stay indoors and you don't interact with other hosts, that would be bad. So in that case, it doesn't want to make you sick. And fever is a good example because you might not want to go outside. So fever is actually something that's generated by the host. And the third answer, they don't care. They don't care if the disease they cause is so far down the road that it doesn't affect their ability to be transmitted from host to host. And that might be examples of that might be pathogens that can cause cancer. Therefore, the pathogens actually win by maintaining some equilibrium. And given the speed at which they can evolve, which is much faster than their hosts, basically the pathogens are in charge. Okay, so at that point I will.
So I made handouts of my thing here because I can tell you about this lecture. Could you just grab some and pass them back? You'll do that? Thanks. I I was reading a bunch of graphic novels when I was preparing some lectures last year, and I thought that it would be fun to put together my lectures as a graphic novel, and then I could have this whole book. And I took one of my lectures that I liked and turned it into a comic book. And 60 hours later, for a 1-hour lecture, I decided that I wasn't going to do this with any other lectures. But this is what it came from. So I'll go over the first couple of pages with you here, and some of the print is kind of small. That's why I gave you the handout. So the point of view I wanted to take is that I wanted to eliminate the question and say that you can't even talk about the microbes or the humans winning, because from my point of view, that means that we forget about the symbiotic relationship between humans and microbes. And we always, when we think about microbes, we usually think about them as disease-causing organisms. And we forget that we couldn't live without them. And so to talk about what would happen, does the microbe win, does the human win, if you remove the microbes, we don't survive. And so I don't think you can even ask the question. I think that we have to live together. And so the picture here is a frightened girl thinking about microorganisms coming to attack her, using a horror movie as an analogy. I think that's the way we think of microbes all the time, where they're the bad guys in the horror movie coming to get us. And I want to give you some examples of situations where that's not true. So I'll give you a couple of examples from nature, and then the best one I can think of in people. So let's see. Let's go back. So I went around grocery stores and started taking pictures of things. And if you go around the grocery store, you can't buy soap anymore that isn't advertised as antimicrobial. And I think it's funny because just soap is antimicrobial. You don't have to do anything to it. You can buy towels now that have antibacterials impregnated in them, which is really funny because it can't work. So this particular drug that they put in towels, triclosan, inhibits, I think, fatty acid synthesis in bacteria. But it only works when it's in the bacterial cell. And if you glue it to the towel, it doesn't do any good. It can't work. And if it comes off the towel, then it's going to come off the first time you wash it. It's meaningless. Okay, but you can buy these things and you pay extra for it. So the question is, looking at what we're trying to do, trying to be clean, trying to use antimicrobial soaps, make sure everything we have is sterile, are we turning ourselves into little bubble boys and trying to avoid the environment? So something to consider is the number of microbes you carry on your body at all times, and it's amazing. So the number of cells in our body is supposed to be up around 10 to the 13 cells that make up a 150-pound human. Carrying that 150-pound person has 10 to the 14 bacterial cells along with them. I don't know if you guys ever watched the movie The Fly. So the idea of The Fly is Jeff Goldblum, or whoever played it in the 1950s version, goes into a transporter and accidentally a fly gets in with him. And the transporter sees two organisms and fuses them, and he comes out you get a half fly, half human coming out, depending on which movie you see. But he should have turned into a microbe, because he's got 10-fold more microbes inside his body. So to think about that number of microbes, that's about equal to the weight of your arm, okay, that you're carrying around with you. Most of it is in your guts. There's a lot of it smeared over your skin. But it's all also just impregnated throughout your tissues. So I think it's really useful to think of your body not as this pristine human body, but as an ecosystem. When you're thinking about curing yourselves of various infections, realize that the antibiotics you're taking are not only working on the thing that's causing the disease, they're also working on all of these gut bacteria that are there providing you vitamins and help keep you healthy and prevent you from getting other kinds of diarrhea. So whenever you try to alter your microbes, you should think about what happens to the Australians every time they try and introduce a new animal or insect or something into their environment. You end up with frogs or rabbits running around the place. Okay. So here's some examples in nature of symbiotic relationships. One of my favorites is this thing up on the left up there. It's a bobtail squid. This is a little squid. It's about an inch long, lives off the coast of Hawaii, and they feed at night. And they have a problem. that if they go out when there's a full moon, they cast a shadow, and fish can see them from down below, and then they'll be eaten. And so the way they've evolved is they have a light-emitting organ inside them that casts just enough light to get rid of their shadow, and they can regulate that. But they can't make the light themselves. The light comes from bacteria that colonize it, and they're born without the bacteria. So what they have to do is, when they're born, they have to filter seawater, find the appropriate bacteria, make sure only that bacterium colonizes their light organ, and then every morning they have to flush out the bacteria because there are too many and find some more the next day. So it's just a really beautiful symbiotic relationship. Chocolate exists because of a symbiotic relationship. If you look at leaves of a chocolate tree, they have little fungi growing within all of the leaves. And people have done experiments where you make germ-free chocolate. It sounds like a great idea. What could be better than chocolate? Germ-free chocolate. So if you take the plant, you sterilize it, and you try and grow it germ-free, it's really susceptible to infections. So the fungus growing in the leaves is actually part of the tree's immune system, which helps prevent other microbes from coming in. So the chocolate does very poorly if you remove its microbe. Last example is from this wasp here, shown below, called the bee wolf. What she does is she catches bees and feeds them to her offspring. And to prevent microbes from growing on the bee and killing the offspring, she has bacteria that she cultures in her antennae and spreads them over the bee to help keep the right microbes present. And if you go in as a scientist and scrape off the appropriate bacteria that she puts in there, her offspring die. The culture gets overrun with bacteria. So you can go out in nature and find these nice symbiotic relationships. And I've been trying to think of some good ones that happen in people, too. And the best one, I just want to make sure I'm at the right part. Yes, the best one that I can come up with has to do with the human vagina. And it starts with this quote from the scientist Sharon Hillier that says, lactobacilli are the xeno warrior princesses of the vagina, which is a great quote. You can look it up on the web. She really said this. You look at that and you think, is that a good thing? I don't know, So the reason she said this is she looks at the transmission of venereal diseases, in particular HIV/AIDS. And what she found when she was looking for indicators of susceptibility to infection was that if the bacteria growing in a woman's vagina were not the wild type, I'm a geneticist, were not the normal bacteria that you'd find growing there in most people, they were much more susceptible to infections. And looking at a variety of different things that might make people more or less susceptible, did they have various different types of infections? Did they have gonorrhea? Did they have syphilis? How old were they? This one's weird. Did the house have electricity? How many sexual partners did they have? None of these things correlated. But if the pH of the vagina was off, they were more likely to convert to be HIV positive. And this is just to point out, you can actually, of course, this creates products. So now you can go and buy something to measure the pH of a vagina. I'm sure it's just regular pH paper, but it costs like 10 times more because it's a medical product. Okay. So, but what I want to point out is that it's no accident, the bacteria that are growing in there. So if you go and look and take cultures and find out what's in there, you find out that it's largely bacteria of the genus Lactobacillus, okay? But a bunch of different types of species, so things like Lactobacillus crispatus and Jensenii and Gasseriae and Ruminus, a bunch of different lactobacilli. And they aren't just growing there. It looks like they're farmed. So what happens is the epithelium secretes carbohydrates that the bacteria eat. And the bacteria eat this, convert it to acid, lower the pH of the environment, and that's what makes the vagina resistant to infections. Okay, so when the pH is down around 4.5, that's driven by the bacteria that are growing there. It's not done by the human body. It's driven by the bacteria, and if you disturb the bacteria, the pH rises, and more infections are able to get in there. So people have thought, wow, this is, again, you can make a product. Maybe there's a way you can correct this. So you go to Whole Foods, you take pictures, and you can find they've got a whole section of microbes and this is great, microbes that you can eat to change your vaginal flora, which I don't understand what you're doing eating these things. But anyway, this is the way you deliver the drug. And it's called like femdophilus and ginatrin. Right next to it, I didn't show this because there's dogophilus, okay? So you can buy something for your dog's natural flora. And the cool thing is it's exactly the same stuff they sell for humans, okay? And the problem with all of this is it's the bacteria that are in there. If you go and read the label, it's Lactobacillus acidophilus, which is yogurt bacteria, okay? That's not the bacteria that you find there naturally. It's yogurt. It's not vaginal bacteria. And so it's not expected to do anything. And the other problem is, the problem with all of these sorts of treatments is that when you're trying to replace the microbes that are there to begin with, they don't want to leave. You can't just throw some new bacteria on and expect that things are going to be better and corrected back to what they were before. The bacteria that are there are occupying a niche, and they don't want to leave. So it might be interesting to think of treatments you can come up with where you'll be able to change your flora to do something new and interesting. But the problem is that we haven't been able to overcome is how to get rid of the microbes that are already there to begin with. So what I tried to do was to steer the debate in another direction. Instead of arguing about are the bacteria going to win and lose and talk about just pathogens, I wanted to bring in symbionts into the mix because day to day, it's true we're dealing with pathogens, but every minute we're carrying around these 10 to the 14 microbes in our body that we deal with just fine. And in fact, if we didn't have them, we'd be much worse off. And there's another half hour worth of material in there. I tried to cover, just for equal opportunity, there's a story about penis bacteria. So, everyone can be equally embarrassed. And then it goes on to some other biology that you can look at if you want. But I thought now Bob could come up and we can start talking. Thanks.
I see.
If you're prepared to ask each other some questions, that's great. But I have a question, and soon the audience will too. Where would you like to begin?
Do you want to start? Or what do you want to do?
Well, you've convinced me I want to keep all my intestinal flora. It sounds like a good thing. We have a colleague who basically says the world is covered with a thin patina of feces. And so if there weren't fungi and bacteria, that would be a very, very thick patina of feces. But what about David studies malaria. What do you think about getting rid of malaria?
So getting rid of malaria would be a wonderful thing, but I don't know how to do it. I'm not studying malaria anymore. I think it's really highly evolved with people and is almost impossible to eradicate.
So the more general question is, although the microbes are generally good, we can sort of identify a whole group of microbes that are pathogens, and would it be okay to just get rid of all those pathogens?
Sure, but there are only 6 that just infect humans. So they're more than that. I guess
lots of viruses.
Okay, so I don't care about viruses so much, but I know Bob loves viruses. But they're big human diseases. There's smallpox and measles, and there are a handful that look like they could be eradicated in people, and you could get rid of it forever. But it's not the majority at all, I think. So.
Okay. I just feel like it would be a good thing if we could get rid of these. There's an argument that that if we get rid of things like smallpox, that we create an open niche and something else will come in there. I don't think it's obvious that when we eliminate a virus that there's an empty niche that will actually create some kind of vacuum. So I think that it's worth, at least as a goal, to try to get rid of the pathogens or some subclass of the microbes.
can buy that.
As to whether we could or not, that's a whole different question.
Sure.
So, yeah, do you have some?
I have a question for you. Yes. In this battle, humans v. microbes, I hope the humans prevail. Some of my best friends are humans, or almost, at least. I understand that in the early 20th century, a flu pandemic killed millions of people. And I understand that this could conceivably happen again with a new variation, a new kind of influenza virus, or perhaps a variation of the SARS virus. If such a thing would happen, I imagine there would be some national measures taken. Perhaps schools would be closed. Places of close contact in general between people would be closed. There'd be a run on Kleenex. I wonder if there are any home safety kits that we might build in the event of such events. For instance, those little masks that people sometimes wear to prevent the spread. I tend to go to my face a lot. My wife's a nurse, and she says, "Don't touch your face so much." Is this a good idea, or is there no chance of this happening?
You're the doctor. I work on fruit flies, so I could give you opinions, but they're opinions.
Well, one of the things that you always want to look at in these questions is what do you gain and what do you lose in the process? And so if you're looking at if you're asking a question, is there a threat of a future pandemic from flu or something else? The answer is definitely yes. And flu would be the best candidate for a major pandemic that would really cause millions of deaths. Flu is around every year, and it's one of the only causes of in the top 10 causes of disease in the United States that is caused by an infectious disease. But the question is, can you prepare for the coming pandemic by doing some specific things? I would say you're probably best off by washing your hands and maintaining your health, and that having that little mask in your bathroom may not be the best way to approach your overall future health.
I have something to add. So we worry about these pandemics that might kill all these people, but we forget about things we can do day to day that save people. So I think the number is something like 600,000 kids die a year from measles. It's completely vaccinatable. They don't. If they got the vaccine, that would be stopped. 600,000 people dying a year is an enormous number, and there are things we can do with that right now. We can be afraid of these potential pandemics and worry about them, but there are things right now that kill a lot of people that we could do something about.
Just to add to that, because I completely agree, it's much better to attack the things that we know about. I think the hype factor is illustrated for me by the fact that if you ask people what viruses or infectious disease they're scared about, these days they might say pandemic flu, but a lot of people would say Ebola. Now, the chance that anybody in this room is going to die of Ebola is vanishingly small, probably nobody in this room. On the other hand, there's a disease that nobody's heard about that's in one of the top causes of death in the world, and it just doesn't have good PR, and it's a virus called rotavirus. How many people have heard of rotavirus? Okay, well, you hear about it a little bit more now because they came out with a vaccine, but that's great. So rotavirus is actually one of the leading causes of death, and the reason why it doesn't get much press play is because it causes diarrhea in infants, and that's not a very dramatic disease like something where you're bleeding from every orifice. So again, it's a question of putting your efforts into where you can make the biggest effect. And with rotavirus, there's several ways to either treat it or prevent it that we can deal with right now. So we can really eliminate a major problem in the world.
When I introduced this dialogue, I mentioned the erector set for the biology student of the future. Is such a thing a possibility? Will it arrive very soon? And does it worry you that, in fact, in the next 100 or 1,000 years, the capabilities of students to create, let's say just on a lark, a mutant of the influenza virus that could wreak havoc?
Yeah, we can do it. So we can do it now.
But can high school students do it?
Yeah, a good high school student.
Oh, no. I teach them.
So I've thought of, after 9/11, when there was a bunch of worry about anthrax and such, I thought but decided it would be a really terrible idea to say how you can find these things in your backyard, and that finding anthrax, getting it from a lab, it just wasn't a big deal. To show that that these things weren't so exotic, and they were honestly things that are growing in the dirt in your backyard. And I would be in jail now if I had taught the course. I decided not to. And these things come up sometimes. A couple of years ago, was it polio virus? Someone made polio from scratch, synthesizing it from scratch chemically with a DNA synthesizer. There was a question, should you have done that? Should you have created the technology that lets you build viruses that we might have gotten rid of? People had to think about how you edit those and how you publish those sorts of things.
So a lot of people are concerned that, for instance, there are rumors that somebody made HIV and could create a virus or a bacteria from scratch. And I think that we're at a point right now where that's not really in our technical capability to create something from scratch. On the other hand, by taking something and modifying it, we have a lot of ability to do that right now. And you can talk about a high school student doing it by accident, or you can talk about somebody who's doing it, intentionally. There's a lot of ability to take an organism and, for instance, select for something that's more dangerous. In fact, you don't even need modern technology to do some of these things, but the modern technology would definitely facilitate that. So the real question here is, that you might come to the conclusion that, okay, let's just get rid of recombinant technology. But it turns out if you did that, you would also shut off the pathway to virtually every future medical advance and every future medicine that we'll be developing. And so what you need to do is you need to basically create ways of either monitoring for people that are doing this, or making it unacceptable for people to do this, but as far as technical ability to manipulate microbes, it's there.
So I have to say, no, Susie, no. Don't build that.
Yeah, that's your job.
Oh, no.
There were rules.
That's your job.
When I was in the science fair, there were rules you couldn't use recombinant DNA. So I isolated some generalized transducing viruses that would do it for me, so I could move the DNA around, and it got around the rule. So there was always a way.
If there are some other questions, we have 2 fine microphones here and 2 fine speakers. Oh, can you make your way up to the mic? Maybe I can remove.
I've got a big mouth. Everybody will.
All right, I'll try to repeat, or maybe one of the speakers will repeat.
Okay, Stephen Hawking, who's actually a physicist, had made the comment that humanity will be done in by viruses. Unfortunately, it was in the Chronicle or something, so I didn't give you any information. How did he construct the argument? How would he have constructed that argument?
It's opinion. He's a physicist talking about viruses. I think.
He's not an idiot.
No. Well, it's essentially illogical for the reasons that I discussed, and that is that viruses don't have a motivation. But the ones that are good at what they do are the ones that we see in the world. And a virus that killed all its hosts would not be good at what it does. Namely, what it does is spread from host to host in order to persist. So what we've had in a couple of outbreaks is in fact, the best example of this is this virus that was introduced into Australia to control the rabbits. And it was an extremely virulent virus. It killed greater than 99% of all the rabbits. And what happened is, if you were in a population and you were this virus and you came in and you killed all the rabbits, you would cease to exist. That would be the end of that virus. And so pretty soon most of the rabbits disappeared. But in a few populations, there were viruses that were less virulent. And what they did is they didn't kill all the rabbits. And in the end, those are the viruses that persisted. And so there became this equilibrium between the rabbits and the viruses. And as there get to be more rabbits, the virus gets to be more virulent and more aggressive going from host to host. And as there get to be fewer rabbits, what you do is you select for less virulent virus in this particular case. So a virus that killed all of humanity would be a terrible virus. From the virus's standpoint, not from the human's standpoint.
All right,
there would be mutant people who it wouldn't infect. They would be missing the receptor or something like that. There'll always be mutant people around who won't get infected.
I saw X-Men too.
A question, please?
In a way, it sort of follows on what you've just been saying. Is sort of really an ethical question almost. I had a friend ask me once when we thought smallpox was almost completely eradicated at the time. They thought it was only existed in one test tube in some laboratory somewhere. And the question is, would it be ethical? And this smallpox is a terrible disease. As far as we know, there's nothing good about it for human beings. But would it be an ethical choice to destroy all the smallpox in the world, assuming you had the possibility to do it? You implied that it would be a good idea to eradicate. Every time I heard that word eradicate, I got really a little nervous. I'm not saying you're wrong, but I don't think it's so obvious that we should, even if we could, eradicate even the worst viruses or bacteria. I think we ought to get them so they're of minimal impact on human beings, but eradicate them makes me uneasy. And that's just almost a comment more than a question. I don't know what to do with it.
I know exactly what to do with it. Whether policy is always opinion rather than, so it's difficult to prescribe ethics in a situation. But as far as policy is concerned, if your goal is to make sure that fewer people die, then what you want to do is you don't want to have things like smallpox around. And smallpox is the kind of virus that spreads so effectively from person to person that it can easily persist in the human population and still kill 10, 20, 30% of the population. So if you're willing to deal with a situation in which every population is willing to give up 30% of its children, then it's fine if we keep smallpox around. I personally have the opinion that I don't think that's a good thing to do with our children, and so I'm happy to get rid of smallpox. The argument that's been made to keep smallpox around is a scientific argument. It says that by studying this genome, we'll be smarter. If by looking at this organism, we'll learn more. And that argument is predicated on the fact that we're so close to knowing everything that if we lose this one thing, they're going to lose a critical piece of information. But my opinion is there's so many things to study in the world, including types of pox viruses that are closely related to smallpox that don't kill people, that for me, as a personal opinion, it'd be fine to eliminate the final stocks of smallpox. Then we would also save ourselves an immense amount of money in terms of precautions that we're now taking against people who might release this smallpox in a malicious fashion. So from an economic argument, from a health argument, you can make a strong argument that we should eliminate these stocks. What's going on now is the scientific argument has actually prevailed, and we've continued to maintain the stocks of smallpox in the world.
And with a virus now, you could rebuild it anyway. So you could get rid of it. But I think the technology is there that you could make it again if there was a need.
Now, also, you get a little distortion here because a lot of times people will tell you that we need to keep the virus around in case there's an outbreak so we can develop drugs and vaccines. And those arguments are erroneous for a number of reasons. First of all, the vaccine for smallpox is actually made using another virus, namely vaccinia, that we're happy to keep around. Okay, so we could eliminate smallpox and still keep around the vaccinia virus and prevent any future cases. Secondly, if we keep it around, we might not need to have a vaccine because there might not be an outbreak. But furthermore, if there is an outbreak and we need to develop new drugs, we'd have to develop them to the strains that were currently existing. We don't know what they would be in the case of an outbreak, so we'd have to wait for that anyway.
Let's maintain the hour-old tradition of going back and forth between the mics now. Do you have a question?
Yes, I do. I was wondering, going back to the whole topic, do we really want to win against the pathogens in the first place? Because a lot of our technology actually comes from it. Like when you think about it, our restrictive endonucleases, our ligators, vectors, they're all microbes. So do we really want to eliminate them? And I actually think a little disease is actually healthy in this world because we are facing overpopulation. So it's true. I'm just wondering, what's your opinion on all that?
So I would argue that we tend to talk about bacteria and think of them as all being pathogens, and that's not the case. So I'm fine with controlling pathogenic microbes, but you don't want to sweep up all microorganisms in that. And so, sure, a lot of biotechnology comes from things that are really safe to work with. Cheese would be an awful thing to give up. I don't know.
Wine, baguettes,
Yeah.
truffles,
Yeah.
beer.
Nitrogen-fixing plants are dependent upon microbes for getting their fertilizers to give all legumes. I think it's a silly argument to talk about microbes and getting rid of those. Pathogens is another story.
Now, there is a real downside to getting rid of pathogens. I'd actually have to find a whole new career.
But if you could do it, if you could snap your fingers and all pathogens are gone, would you do it?
You know, it's kind of an unrealistic situation of getting all pathogens gone. But if you ask me, would I be happy to destroy the stocks of smallpox? Yes. Get rid of polio? Yes. Get rid of measles? Yes. Get rid of malaria? Yes. So I'd actually, there are other pathogens that sort of are on the gray border between normal, helpful things and dangerous things. So, for instance, rarely lactobacillus can cause disease. Okay, rarely the stuff that we make bread out of can cause disease. Okay, I don't really want to get rid of those things, but there are things that are sort of dedicated pathogens, and yes, I would be happy to get rid of the dedicated pathogens.
Please.
I think that one of the big take-home messages is the symbiosis between humans and microbes in general, and I think that we win if we are able to interact in a way of symbiosis. And so in that vein, there are three things in which humankind has for relating to microorganisms. One is genetic diversity, and you can argue whether or not the microbes determine genetic diversity. There are multiple cases of HIV selecting for long-term non-progressors and malaria selecting for persons with sickle cell trait. Both genetic defects which are protective against disease. So you can. One of my questions is: are the microbes really calling the shots here and driving which way humans are evolving? The second thing is we have our immune systems, which in the situation with smallpox, the cow milk girls were protected because they had been exposed to vaccinia, and now we vaccinate folks, and we have potential for vaccinating against the pathogens which exist as opposed to just microbes. So I don't have really a specific question about the immune system, but the last part of our relationship is the ability of microbes and humans to I'm blanking on my last point. Maybe you can comment on the evolution question, and I will remember the last point that I wanted to make.
So there are a lot of examples of things for malaria come to mind. There's sickle cell anemia, thalassemias, glucose-6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency, and eating fava beans are things that are supposed to be protective. So sure, there are a lot of examples where it looks like we've been shaped by pressures, by disease pressures. One thing I wanted to say about the immune system is the best immunologists are microbes, and pathogens are pathogens because they can defeat the immune system. So the reason that they're able to grow in our bodies and cause disease, well, there are two parts. They're able to grow in our bodies because they found particular ways of defeating the immune system. The disease that we get is usually not because the bacteria are eating a hole in our brain or something like that, though that can happen. It's because of our immune response against the microbes. The immune response is too large and it causes the pathology. So that's what I wanted to say.
I mean, in terms of evolution, I think it's a dance. I think that the microbes, and I like the points that you made. I think the microbes are actually driving our evolution, but there's no question that we're profoundly driving the microbe evolution. Their goal is to be able to persist in our body, and so they're shaped. In some ways, they're shaped more effectively by us, by our ecosystem, than we are by them. And you can give examples of that where if you throw some antiviral compounds at HIV, it will very, very quickly adapt in a way that will make it resistant to those compounds. And so we're driving their evolution. Again, if our immune system, a great example is flu, we are actually shaping the evolution of flu because as the entire human population becomes immune to one strain of flu, it can't be transmitted. And so what that flu needs to do is mutate into a new form that our immune system can't recognize. So we are actually driving this continuous mutation of flu virus. We don't make the mutations, but we actually select for the mutations so that every year flu will be different, which means that every year we have to go get a different flu vaccine. It's not that the flu vaccine wore off. It's that we've actually pushed flu to a different, to change enough that we need to get revaccinated.
I think that your comments remind me of my last point, which was our relationship with microbes is also dependent on our commensal bacteria that colonize us and protect us. And so in that train of thought, is medicine moving towards a way where we repopulate people with good bacteria or normal colonizers to protect them in the future from disease, and whether or not there are any viruses that would do the same, colonize humans to protect them from any viral infections?
So I wish we could do that with changing flora. So I about 10 years ago, I stopped being able to eat milk, which is awful. And you know what happens, for those of you who this has happened to, is the microbes in your guts really have a field day when you have milk, and they produce enormous amounts of gas, and you just get really sick. I'd love to be able to go in there and change the microbes, but they're there. And you know, what do? Do I start from breast milk again? It's not really practical. You know, you got to go and recapitulate your whole life cycle. So there isn't a way of going back yet and doing that kind of thing. But for my students, I always give them a question of, you know, if you made a designer microbe to do something different with your body, you know, try to get them think like entrepreneurs. You know, what could you do? Could change body odor. I don't know. You can play with things.
I think medically it would be, you know, at least a goal to try to shape the flora, the microflora within people's bodies. We know that some diseases are caused not by specific pathogens, but just by imbalances between normal pathogens. So I think that would be a goal. I don't think we're really at the point where we can do that yet. So I just want to make a point that to a first approximation, probably second and third, there are lots of good bacteria in the world and lots of good fungi in the world, but of the viruses that you know about that infect humans, there aren't really normal flora in the same sense that there are normal flora for bacteria. There are some viruses that inhabit our body for our entire lives, but it's not really normal flora. It's more like they're in control and they figured out a way to stay around without being eliminated, like the herpes viruses. And
they can be protective, right? There's some new mouse work that in mice, herpes can be protective against some infections. And you can't do the experiment in people, well, because you can't do experiments in people. And there are no people who don't have these things. At least they're mutants if they do.
So, yeah, I mean, it's possible. We don't really have good evidence in humans that these things are protective. There is a virus called GB virus, which seems to be protective against a number of different conditions, and there's no disease yet associated with it. It's a human virus. It's actually related to hepatitis C, and so it's a bit of an enigma, but that's kind of the rarity, and we still really don't have the whole picture there. So generally speaking, viruses are kind of not your friend in the same way that bacteria are your friend.
I was wondering whether or not you think any viruses similar to the virus in Resident Evil are an actual possibility.
So I teach a course on this. I taught for a couple of years, I taught a freshman seminar where we looked at the pathogenesis of infectious disease in horror movies because I thought it was a good way of getting non-science students in, and we do 28 days later. Resident Evil, there's just not enough about the virus in there to do it. But what it brings up is the way microorganisms can change your behavior. And so there's one neat example of that. It's a microorganism called toxoplasma, which in the States, I think, infects about 10% of people. In France, it's something like 75% of people. It depends on your diet and whether you eat uncooked meat and such. But it's associated with people taking higher risks. People become risk takers when they're infected with toxo. So there are examples of manipulation, subtle manipulations of humans. In the animal world, you can find really spectacular manipulations of hosts by their parasites. But zombies are clearly an infectious disease in all the modern movies. Now that we're done with the voodoo zombies, all the modern movies have been infectious disease zombies. Yeah, not quite like that.
Would you be pleased to be commented on 28 days?
We did that class too. That one's really cool. Actually, what's his name? The last director of the NIH, Harold Varmus, wrote a review of it in the New York Times, and I was so disappointed because I was getting ready to write a review of this thing, and no one's going to beat Harold Varmus's review. So, but that's a neat movie because they did some interesting things with the spread of the disease. It spread so rapidly and infects so many people that they were able to imagine it being isolated in Great Britain. And it altered the plot of the movie, because if it had spread more slowly, or if it wasn't as lethal, it would have spread to the rest of the world. And so they thought carefully about the way they wanted that disease to move in the movie.
Did you have another part of the question?
Yeah, but do you think it's an actual possibility?
No.
Okay.
Sorry.
I understand that in our gut and in our saliva, we have a profile of different types of microorganisms, and they're different for different people. Can you comment on kind of the number, just kind of is it in the 50s or is it in the 10,000s of different types, not just the pure numbers? And also, can you foresee a CSI movie or a sequence where they're going to say, yeah, this is obviously the killer because he has this type of profile in his gut versus something or another?
I think it's 500 or something like that species, but as they look at it closer and closer, they'll find that it's different. And there's nothing that's normal. Everyone's a variation. I think when you look in different locations, you'll find people of different microbes. And the CSI guys, they read the literature carefully. So yeah, I'm surprised that they haven't come up with it already. It'll have to do with stool samples or something like that. I don't know how they'll work that into the plot.
So anyway, I think it's a great plot. I think you ought to submit the screenplay as soon as you can. I don't know the actual number of species, but a lot of this work, there's interesting work by David Relman at Stanford, and he's basically characterized the biological diversity of the flora in his mouth. And what he's done is he's discovered that the diversity in his mouth is unbelievably great, and he's discovered whole new classes, basically a kingdom of bacteria that weren't known. They don't even have names yet. They're just assigned numbers and stuff. And for instance, there are these exotic bacteria that live in hot springs in Yellowstone. But it turns out they didn't actually need to go to Yellowstone because we have those types of bacteria actually living in our own mouths. So it's actually given the diversity and the difference between individual to individual, you could actually do that. It does change from depending on what you're eating and depending on your health status and things like that. So you could actually, there are people that are very interested in using that as a measure of health and disease.
But someone's saying, obviously this guy was in London 2 months ago. Would be an interesting plot thing. Anyway, thank you.
My question was, since certain diseases are transferred from animals to humans, are there any way we could prevent that disease from getting transferred besides not eating that animal, or eating certain types of animals?
Well, there are different ways it can happen. So there are cases where you'll get E. coli or listeria because meat was improperly processed and it's contaminated with feces. So we can be careful about that by making sure meat processing is really careful. There are situations, though, say with yellow fever, where a mosquito will feed on a monkey and then feed on you. That's much more difficult to control. It's hard you can use mosquito eradication or something like that, but you have a reservoir of this virus in the wild in an animal that you like, and you can't go and eliminate that animal, and it's hard to eliminate the disease in the animal. You can't go vaccinate all of the monkeys. So there are some situations where it enters our food chain where we can control it, but there are other situations where there are wild diseases that are passed to us that it's not so easy to control.
So in some sense, your question calls up the whole issue of a scorecard, which we actually haven't addressed yet, and that is sort of how are we doing? Are we winning? Are we losing? And what are the factors involved in whether we're winning or losing? And one measure, there's several measures that suggest that maybe we're doing a good job. We've gotten rid of virtually all smallpox except for the ones that are in laboratories. We're doing a good job on measles worldwide. We're doing a good job on polio worldwide. But on the other hand, if we look at the impact of infectious disease, we're doing a bad job when it comes to malaria. We're doing a bad job when it comes to HIV, tuberculosis, and as you said, there's this whole pipeline of new diseases that are coming out. And actually, if you'll indulge me, I have a couple of slides that are kind of related to this. So I planted that. No, I didn't really. So maybe this will work. Or maybe it won't. Okay, so if we think about emerging microbes, there's a whole bunch of different ways that we see different microbes. We see brand new ones that we never saw before, and usually they're from other animals, but this would be in the human population. We see ones that have been around for a long time, but we've just discovered them because there's an awful lot that we don't know. There are ones that are getting more dangerous, and we can actually talk about why they're getting more dangerous, and there's ones that are actually increasing in their prevalence, such as dengue viruses is just expanding. So this is from Family Circus. How did viruses are spread from one person to the next? How did the first person get it? And the answer is they're spread between animals. And so even if we eliminated all these viruses from humans, we'd still have this influx of related viruses that would be colonizing humans. So, and it's because they can undergo change. This is embarrassing moments at gene parties. Oh my goodness, Vinny's mutating. So you can really ask the question of why are there so many bugs? And like when the world was created, why were there so many different kinds of microorganisms? And in terms of pathogens, basically, if you look at the whole, this is the tree of life, and every single thing on there has its pathogens that are annoying it. And so those pathogens are all potentially can jump into the human population. And people have looked at this influx of pathogens, and a landmark work published by the Institute of Medicine in 1992 looked at a number of the causes that you're referring to in terms of why these pathogens enter the population. And then they revised this in 2003. And it's interesting to look at the list of these causes and also how they differed in 92 versus 2003. And they include things like where do people live? What's their behavior? Technology and industry, economic movement. Now, if you think about things like population increase, we're actually making life really great for the microbes. Okay, when we come into a room like this, when people lived in villages and they didn't congregate like this, microbes had a lot of harder time to move around. When people didn't fly on airplanes, microbes had a hard time. When we didn't create large population of immunocompromised individuals, microbes had a harder time. When there was more sort of community and people looked after each other, microbes had a harder time. Things like weather change could actually facilitate the spread of microbes. And the yellow ones are the ones that were added to the list, and they include poverty and social inequality, war and famine. Now, these were still factors, but they weren't really on our radar screen in terms of the ability to create disease in populations. But these are all things that are good news for the microbes. Okay, so in some sense, we're doing a lot of things that's actually facilitating the spread. You talked about what you can do. Well, you can basically look at all these different factors. And of course, one that didn't occur to us before 9/11, at least it didn't occur to very many people, was the intent to harm. And so that's one of the reasons why we have to be concerned about remaining stocks of smallpox and lack of political will. So I think your question is a good one. Even if we could eliminate all those microbes, we would still have to remain ever vigilant because these microbes would continue to enter into the human population. And the CDC has actually made a list of, in the last 10 or so years, and we have plague and Ebola and Hanta and bird flu and mad cow disease and West Nile and bacteria that are resistant to virtually every antibiotic we have. And so basically there's a lot of these different things. 2007 is not up there, but it was a great year for all sorts of emerging pathogens. So this is not slowing down. Partly it's so we're more aware of it, but actually, even if we account for the fact that we're more vigilant now, there's still a lot of new things that are entering the human population and looking bad. So anyway, thanks for that question.
Thank you.
Please.
Is microbes the cause of every single sickness?
No, they're things. So if there are things that happen to us that microbes don't drive. Although if I say them, then someone could probably say, "Oh no, I know an example where this happens." But maybe stroke and heart attack, cancer. But I can come up with examples where those can be driven by microbes too. So many of the reasons we die aren't because of microorganisms.
It's a wonderful question. If you look at the things that are caused by infectious disease in the U.S., it's dropping down. Most of the top 10 causes of death are not things that we recognize as infectious disease. In fact, the only one that's in there is influenza and pneumonia complications. So if the other ones are things like strokes and heart attacks and cancers and things like that. But the reason why it's a fascinating question is because as we've learned more and more, we find that in some cases of even heart disease and cancer and primary pulmonary hypertension is a good example. We recently discovered that virtually every single case is related to one specific virus. And we're discovering that these things are causing much more havoc than we had previously realized. But a lot of times it's because of things getting out of whack.
I have two questions for you. I'll try and keep them short. The first one is, you read a lot these days about multi-resistant bacteria and how, particularly in our hospitals, a lot of them are colonized by these bacteria that are resistant to all known antibiotics, but maybe one left. I'm wondering how you think this is going to play out. I mean, are we going to lose our last line of defense and go back to earlier times as regards our ability to treat infectious diseases?
The infectious disease doctors think this is a question of major importance. And in some sense, it may be that the antibiotic era was a little teeny blip in time from about World War II until sometime early in the 21st century, where the microbes prevailed and we became resistant. And examples include common staph, which is basically everywhere in the environment, is something that causes much disease, and as it becomes resistant to antibiotics, a lot more people are going to die. Tuberculosis is multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, or extreme XDR-TB, extreme resistant tuberculosis, are major concerns. At the turn of the century, from the 1800s to the 1900s, tuberculosis was the #1 cause of death in San Francisco. If we didn't have drugs to treat it, who knows what would happen in terms of the incidence of tuberculosis. So the concern is that new classes of drugs are coming down the pipeline at a slower rate to the rate at which microbes can evolve resistant to existing classes of drugs. It's actually very closely related to the last discussion about, or the first discussion today about the drug companies, because one great hope is that the Human Genome Project and all the recombinant technology and everything like that will give us the ability to develop whole new classes of drugs that are specifically targeted at microorganisms, so we can eliminate the bad ones without perturbing the good ones, which we want to keep around. And most of the ones that we have in our body are the good ones, but there's a few really bad actors. So yeah, it's a real concern.
Second question. Since our bodies are full of beneficial bacteria, why isn't it a really dangerous thing to do to take a course of broad-spectrum antibiotics and kill all those buggers? When you get recolonized, it might not come out as well as it was before.
It's true. I don't know how many people have taken a good course of antibiotics and ended up with a wicked case of diarrhea when that was going on. That can happen. But I think that it tends not to be so serious, and you do get recolonized reasonably well. I think practically, if it killed people, we wouldn't do it. So it tends to work out okay.
But it is very important to realize that that antibiotics are not candy. They can wreak havoc in a lot of ways. They can eliminate normal flora, which can actually cause diarrhea. They can also, by eliminating normal flora, provide the normal flora protective. So pathogens can come in. And in fact, there's one pathogen that it's sort of a very weak pathogen that's in many people's gut, and the normal pathogen keeps it in check. And when you give people antibiotics, it allows this pathogen, which is slow growing, but actually a little bit sturdier in terms of the antibiotics, to grow up, and it causes a condition called pseudomembranous colitis. The organism is called Clostridium difficile, and it's a potentially life-threatening condition, not to mention the fact that you can develop resistance, which can be transferred to pathogenic bacteria, resistance in your normal bacteria, and you can develop allergic reactions. So basically, taking antibiotics should only be done when you actually need them.
I've heard theories that there's a species of yeast that can get out of control in your gut unless it's held in check by bacteria. Is that just a crackpot idea, or is there any truth to it?
Many bacteria grow faster than yeast, and so a lot of the bacteria, the normal bacterial flora, actually hold the yeast in check. And that's another one of the complications of course of antibiotic is basically various types of yeast infections. So that's a well characterized situation that happens all the time.
I regret that we have time for just one more question.
Okay. From what I know, mosquitoes are responsible for a lot of transfer of diseases. But since their bodies are so small, I'm wondering if mosquitoes have some kind of unique immune system that allows them to resist the viruses that will be fatal to us humans.
Yeah, so I'm smiling. That's what I work on. So, so people tend to ignore the fact that little animals are going to have a pretty good immune system too. The way mosquitoes have to live for a couple of weeks in order to be able to pass things along, and they've got a good immune system. They tend not to die when they get infected with malaria or yellow fever. Those infections are very quiet in the mosquito, and they have a very small effect on the mosquito biology. And one of the reasons is for malaria that this has to be true is that it takes 10 days for the malaria parasite in order to mature in the mosquito. And so it can't kill the mosquito. If it shortens the mosquito's lifespan, it won't live to pass on the parasite. And so the parasite's probably evolved so that it doesn't cause a serious infection. But insects have terrific immune systems, and they teach us a lot about our own immune system. They have a very similar immune system to us. It's surprising what's the same.
It also points out the fact that the few pathogens that you see out of all the microbes in the world are those that have developed the ability to get around our immune system. And so the fact that they would not kill the mosquito means that the mosquito is actually controlling the malaria parasite as well, because if it was too virulent, it would kill the mosquito. So if we look at the ones that cause disease in humans, it's a very small subclass that have ways of getting around our defenses.
If you have further questions, maybe our speakers will be willing to answer them out in the hallway here. But I remind you, if you did ask a question, please don't make us engage in the dance of the lawyers. Wonderfest can't afford that. Please do come down and sign a waiver. There have been some great questions here, as I must ask our speakers to sign the waiver here. Please join me in thanking Professor Siegel and Professor Schneider.